أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين Respected scholars, elders, brothers, sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We once again thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for having given us this opportunity on this blessed night of Laylatul Jumu'ah, which is the Laylatul Qadr of the week, and one of the best acts to be performed on the Laylatul Qadr is gaining knowledge. So this is our effort. May Allah accept it, inshallah. This lecture was initially scheduled for last week, which happened to be the 15th of Shawwal. But we couldn't gather here because of the weather. So the topic has remained the same. And because of the date, last week I had chosen this topic, the concept of defeat and loss in a war based on the Battle of Uhud. So 15th of Shawwal coincides with the Battle of Uhud. That's when the Battle of Uhud happened, 3 AH. According to some riwayat, it was the 7th of Shawwal, but the calendars that we have, it's 15th of Shawwal, 625 AD, and it was the month of March. It is a very important event as far as Islamic history is concerned. And the importance is shown by the Holy Quran itself, whereby almost 50 verses have been dedicated towards this battle, to explain this battle. So Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, starting from verse number 121. So 121 to verse number 129 talks about the initial stages of the war, the planning, how the Prophet planned and how he arranged his army and the status of the soldiers. And then the tone changes, or the subject changes. Verse number 130 to 138, Allah talks about riba, He talks about usury, which is not a coincidence. The Mufassirin explained that there is a reason behind putting these verses right in between the Battle of Uhud. And then from verses 139 to 171, again it continues to talk about the Battle of Uhud as to how it unfolded and how it ended. And then 172 to 174, it talks about the Battle of Hamra al-Asad, which was immediately after the Battle of Uhud, when the Muslims, after having been defeated, so-called defeat, it wasn't a defeat per se, because the main purpose of the Quraysh was to kill the Holy Prophet and to eliminate this threat of Islam, and that did not happen. The Prophet was alive after this war, and so was his city. The Medina was also intact, and so was Islam. In fact, it became a big stepping stone for the progress of religion after this war. But immediately after returning, after burying the Shuhada, when they returned back to Medina, and the Quraysh were on the way back to Makkah, and they thought, we haven't finished the job. Why did we leave it halfway? So they regrouped and started coming back for the Muslims. And the Muslims were informed So they're all demoralized, injured, tired, back in Medina. And the command again came from the Holy Prophet that we need to regroup and go and fight these kuffars. So Battle of Hamra al-Asad. So the Quran talks about this battle from verse number 172 to 174. So third year of Hijrah, it was just after migration. Second Hijrah was Battle of Badr, in which the Muslims had an unexpected victory. Their numbers were less, and they were not expecting the victory that they got. There was divine help, and they won the battle, and it was because of their faith and Iman. So when the call for this battle came in, they were a lot more confident. They said, we have the numbers. So it was 1,000 now. From 313, they had 1,000 soldiers now. But on the other side, the defeat of Badr had really hurt the Quraysh. And the Quraysh were not happy about it. And they had to take revenge on the Muslims. So this is what motivated them. So Abu Sufyan was one of the only remaining chiefs of the Quraysh. Abu Jahl, I think, was killed in the Battle of Badr. So when he comes back, he tells the Quraysh that nobody is going to weep and nobody is going to mourn on Badr. Because he thought, if once they start weeping and once they start mourning about the Battle of Badr, it will reduce their confidence or their zeal to fight the Muslims. He himself denied, so he made it haram on himself to taste any form of pleasure for a whole year in preparation for the war that was to come. That was the Battle of Uhud. So he gathered 3,000 soldiers, 200 horsemen, and 700 men in armor. And this was a big thing. So out of 3,000 soldiers, 200 horses, and 700 men in armor. This is the defense system, the modern defense system that we have. The David sling, and all the defense systems that we have. In those days it was the armor. Not only that, but historians say that he carried the idol. He put an idol on the camel and carried it with him. And there was one difference, big difference. He took the women folk along with the army. So there's a historian by the name of Margoliouth. He says that Abu Sufyan used sex and religion as motivators for this war. On the other side, Muslims were 1,000 as they left Medina. So when they heard about the war, the initial planning was that we were going to fight the enemy from within Medina. It will be easier within our own homes. But then they started consulting, and some of the companions said, no, I think we should go out and fight them outside Medina for the sake of, we need to protect our women folk, we need to protect the city, and it will be easier to fight them outside. So they left Medina and went towards the mountains of Uhud. So initially there was a big setback. Abdullah bin Ubay, who was the head of the Munafiqeen, the hypocrites, he joined the Prophet initially. On reaching Uhud, he turned back. So a third of Prophet's army, he took 300 men with him and they went back to Medina. He said, we are not going to fight. We are going to lose this war. It's no use fighting. So a big setback for the army of the Prophet. So he left him with 700 soldiers only. No horsemen. In some riwayat it says 1 or 2 horsemen only. And only 100 in armor. Only 100 people had defensive armor on them. So Prophet positioned his army on the Battle of Uhud with the mountain of Uhud behind him as protection, so that the enemies couldn't attack him from behind. And there's a small crevice. So they've explained the whole thing on Google Maps. And there are many animated clips for those of you who are interested. And when people go for Umrah or Hajj or guided tours outside Medina, usually the guides would explain this to them. They go to the mountains of Uhud and they would explain that these are the mountains of Uhud. There's a small crevice on the mountain. That's where the Prophet positioned himself. He put his army. And there was a small mountain on the side. It was called Jabal al-Rummah, the mountain of archers, which would have made them vulnerable. So that was one area that was open, and there was a possibility that the Qurayshi army would have come from behind and attacked them. So Prophet placed Abdullah ibn Jubayr there with 50 archers on top of the mountain to protect that area, to protect that flank of the army, to prevent the Quraysh from coming from behind. So as usual, the battle started 1-1. They say almost 9 flag bearers of the Quraysh were killed by Imam Ali and Hamza. And then the proper battle started. And within a short time, the Quraysh started losing. They were overwhelmed and they started retreating. And once they started withdrawing, the Muslims, because they did not have enough horsemen, they couldn't chase them. So as the Quraysh withdrew, the Muslims started collecting the war booty. Now the archers on Jabal al-Rumah, they could see the scene whereby the Quraysh are now withdrawing, and it looks like a victory, and the Muslims are collecting the war booty, and they got enticed. They said, we are going to lose out on this booty. So they said, we want to go and collect this war booty. And Abdullah bin Jubayr tells them, don't. Prophet had commanded us that whether we are winning this war or we are losing, you don't move from this mountain. Whether it's victory or loss, you don't move from this mountain until you are commanded by the Holy Prophet himself. They disobeyed and they came down from that mountain to go for the booty. And Khalid bin Walid, who was one of the commanders of the Quraysh, with his army was waiting for this moment. The moment they came down, he attacked the remaining people, the archers on Jabal al-Rumah, and he came from behind that mountain. And as the Quraysh saw him coming from behind, they also picked up their flags and regrouped and started coming towards the Muslims. So now the Muslims were sandwiched between the army of Khalid bin Walid and that of Abu Sufyan. So the battle was so fierce and the Muslims were overwhelmed. Many got martyred and many ran away from the battlefield. Some towards the mountain, some ran back towards Medina. And once those Muslims were dispersed, they went for the Holy Prophet. Holy Prophet was well protected in that crevice. So historians say only 13 people remained with the Holy Prophet. The rest were martyred and they had dispersed. Only 13 people. And one of them was Imam Ali alayhi salam. The other one was Mus'ab bin Umair, the first ambassador of Islam to Medina, who had brought Islam to Medina before the Holy Prophet. And there was a lady by the name of Nasiba who had brought her son, and she used to help in nursing the wounded. And her son was one of the people who wanted to run away. This lady called her son, you cannot be running away. The son came, he was martyred. Nasiba took up the sword and she also stood on the battlefield. And they say she was also injured, not martyred, but she was also injured. But that's how fierce the battle was. until women had to get involved. So Musab ibn Umair was also martyred, and some historians say that he had dressed up like the Holy Prophet. So when he was martyred and he fell, the Quraysh thought that they have killed the Prophet, and it was announced that the Prophet has been killed, and the Quraysh thought that they have won, so they withdrew. And the Muslims, on hearing this, most of them or some of them thought, okay, the battle is over, so they also ran away. But it was not the Holy Prophet, but the Holy Prophet was injured. They say he broke his tooth in this battle. And then, of course, they go back, they regroup, they come back for the battle of Hamra al-Asad within a few days. The Muslims also regroup, but this battle did not happen. And the Quraysh turned back and went back to Makkah, and the Muslims came back to Medina. So this is in summary is the Battle of Uhud. Now if you look at the Battle of Uhud and compare it to our present day warfare, there is no comparison. There you have horses and you have armor and soldiers on foot, and very few who had proper armory, swords and spears. This day and age, warfare is totally different. You're talking of drones now, and Iron Dome, and David's sling, and different kinds of missiles. And now you're talking of nuclear warfare. So if you look at the details of the war, based on what history tells us as to what happened, we might not be able to apply it to our day-to-day lives today. But this is the miracle of the Holy Quran. When the Quran describes this battle of Uhud, 50 verses describing this battle, and when you see how Quran describes this battle, and you look at the verses, and you see how the Mufassirin have interpreted these verses, and you take that meaning out of those verses and apply it, it's very applicable to what is happening today. So Tafsir al-Mizan, Allama Tabatabai, and there is another tafsir, an enlightening commentary of the Holy Quran by a group of scholars, which is there on alislam.org. They say that the verses of this battle of Uhud and the verses that have described this battle, if you were to dissect these verses, 4 groups of people would come up. 4 groups of people would come up from this battle. So before some time here, I think we had discussed Surah Waqiyah, comparing what is happening in Gaza to Surah Waqiyah on the day of Qiyamah. You have the Sabiqun, you have the Ashabul Yameen and Ashabul Shimal. There are people who are in the forefront, there are people who are supporting on the right, and there are people who are totally against what is happening in Gaza. So look at the 4 groups here. Group number 1, there are those who turn back. Even before fighting the war, they turned back to Medina, and there were those who were half-hearted. When they reached the plains of Uhud, and when the battle was about to start, they started shaking. So Quran describes them. Banu Haritha, there was one tribe, Banu Haritha and Banu Salma. These were 2 tribes. But Allah strengthened their hearts and they took part. And there's a reason for that. We're going to discuss it. So that is one group. Those who turned back, who never fought. And there were those whose hearts started shaking. They were iffy before the battle, but they participated in the battle. Number 2 were the disobedient ones. The archers on Jabal al-Rumah, who disobeyed the command of the Prophet and their commander, Abdullah bin Jubair, and the people who fled from the war. The Prophet was calling them, the Quran describes it. Prophet was calling them They didn't even look back to listen to the command of the Prophet. They ran away from the battlefield. So the disobedient ones. This is the second group. Number 3 are the shuhada, the martyrs who got martyred at the time of war, before they were overwhelmed, and the ones who were martyred after they were overwhelmed. So before the chase happened, before fleeing the battlefield, there were those who were martyred, and there were those who got martyred after being sandwiched in the army of Khalid bin Walid and Abu Sufyan. Hazrat Hamza was one of them, Sayyidul Shuhada at that time. So this is the third group. And fourth group are those, they're called the patient ones, the Sabirun. Those who fought and protected the Prophet in spite of all the injuries, in spite of their number. They fought, but they did not get martyred. Quran describes them also. So these 4 groups. So the first group, the 300 soldiers who turned back with Abdullah bin Ubay, the hypocrites, and those whose hearts started shaking, the Banu Salma and Banu Haritha. So the Quran describes them. Surah Al Imran, verse number 167. So Allah says that we ordained this battle to differentiate between the mu'mineen and the hypocrites. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا يعلم الذين نافقوا وقيل لهم تعالوا قاتلوا في سبيل الله أو ادفعوا قال لو نعلم قتالا لاتبعناكم هم للكفر يومئذ أقرب منهم للإيمان يقولون بأفواههم ما ليس في قلوبهم والله أعلم بما يكتمون. So the purpose of the battle was to ascertain who is a mu'min and who is a hypocrite. When they were told by the Holy Prophet, come fight in the way of Allah or defend yourselves, they said, if we knew any fighting, we would surely have followed you. They told the Prophet, we don't know how to fight. So they turned back. That day they were nearer to unfaith than to faith. They were nearer to kufr than they were to iman. They say with their mouths what is not in their hearts, and Allah knows well whatever they conceal. These are the munafiqun. Not only did they turn back, but they started influencing the people who had participated in the battle. When they came back, alladhina qalu, so they are telling the people who had fought in the battle, alladhina qalu li ikhwanihim wa qa'adu law ata'una ma qutilu, those who said of their brethren, while they themselves sat back, they did not go for the battle. Now they're telling the people who participated in the battle, had they obeyed us, they wouldn't have been killed. If you had listened to us, you wouldn't have been killed. قُلْ فَادْرَعُوا عَنْ أَنفُسِكُمُ الْمَوْتِ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. So Allah tells them, then keep death off yourselves if you're truthful. You are taunting the mu'mineen who fought in the war. Allah tells them, if you can keep death away from yourselves, try it. So one of the reasons was hypocrisy in their hearts, and that's why they turned back, which is a very obvious reason. But the second source, second problem here, why did they turn back? And the Mufassirin say this is why the 8 verses of riba have been placed right in between the description of Battle of Uhud. So it's as if to say that is this haram earning that you have, the earnings that you have through usury, through riba, that is what is bringing hypocrisy in your heart. That's why the source of earning and the funding of the war, if the funding of the war comes from a haram source, the army starts shaking. Victory will be nowhere in sight. As for those who are half-hearted, the Banu Salma and the Banu Haritha, the verse is explained. إِذْ هَمَّتْ تَائِفَتَانِ مِنْكُمْ أَن تَفْشَلَ وَاللَّهُ وَلِيُّهُمَا وَعَلَى اللَّهِ فَلْيَتَوَكَّلِ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. When the two groups among you are about to lose courage, though Allah is their guardian, and in Allah let all the faithful put their trust. So Allah saved them from a major sin. If they had turned back with the munafiqeen, they would have followed in sin. Allah protected them, one. Secondly, Allah wanted them to take part in this battle so that they can also be purged. The purpose of battle was to purge, to purify. So Allah strengthened their hearts. He saved them from a major sin, and they also took part in the purification process to know themselves as to where they stand when it comes to Iman. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So in conventional battle, it's only about winning and losing. You talk about the armor, the weaponry that we have, how many people are going to keep standing, how many people are going to die. But Quran has a different dimension altogether. Quran talks about the diseases of the heart, the hypocrites. Why were they scared to go to battle? Those who are half-hearted, what happened to them? And those who participated were the victors, those who did not participate. So it's not about the result of the battle, but what was happening during the battle. So this is the first group. Second group, those who disobeyed the Holy Prophet, the archers and those who fled. So Quran gives a reason as to why they disobeyed the Prophet. It is not like what happened there is what scared them. There was something in their hearts which caused them to flee from the battlefield. So number one is hubbud dunya. وَلَقَدْ صَدَقَكُمُ اللَّهُ وَعْدَهُ إِذْ تَحُسُّونَهُمْ بِإِذْنِهِ. Allah had given them a promise that if you have faith and you're steadfast, you'll win. And Allah certainly fulfilled His promise. For as long as they were steadfast, they were winning. حتى إذا فشلتم وتنازعتم في الأمر وعصيتم من بعد ما أراكم ما تحبون. Until you lost courage and you disputed about the matter and disobeyed after He showed you what you loved. Hubbud dunya. When they saw the booty, the worldly beauty, the booty, they disobeyed the Prophet, and that became a result of them fleeing or getting killed in the battle. So that was one. Number two, they are told that you did not have enough trust in the Holy Prophet. You thought that when the booty is collected, the Prophet is not trustworthy enough to distribute this booty. So Quran says, وَمَا كَانَ لِنَبِيٍّ أَن يَغُلْ. A prophet may not breach his trust. When the Prophet has told you that the booty is going to be divided equally, you should have faith in the Holy Prophet. So hubbud dunya, one. Secondly, lack of trust in the Holy Prophet. They were living with the Holy Prophet, yet they did not have enough trust in the Holy Prophet. They failed to understand the character of the Holy Prophet. It's a big lesson for us. We cry for the 12th Imam. If we don't understand his character, this is going to happen with us also. Hubbud dunya is going to take us away from the 12th Imam. Lack of trust of the 12th Imam. You know, he won't be able to do it. There are many people. What can one person do? With so much of dhulm that is happening, one person cannot do everything. It is our lack of understanding of the 12th Holy Imam. And there are those who ran away. So there are those who disobeyed the Prophet and those who ran away. This ayah is very, very scary. Quran says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ تَوَلَّوْا مِنْكُمْ يَوْمَ التَّقَى الْجَمَعَانِ. Those of you who fled on the day when the two armies met. إِنَّمَا اسْتَزَلَّهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ بِبَعْضٍ مَا كَسَبُوا وَلَقَدْ عَفَى اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ غَفُورٌ حَلِيمٌ. Only shaitan had made them stumble because of some of their past deeds. It was their past deeds that weakened their hearts. The sinning before the war. So performance on the battlefield depends on your performance off the battlefield. the way they were behaving in Makkah and Medina prior to the Battle of Uhud, those who were sinning, their hearts were weaker and shaitan could make them stumble, and that's why they fled from the battlefield. So this is a very, very important point. If you want to be successful in a battle, a holy jihad, the first thing, when you see the biographies of the shuhada, they would be very, very careful when it came to sinning. They would not sin. There's a story of a shaheed, I forget his name. His friends would say he would always carry a book with him, a notebook with him. And every moment he would take out the book and write something. After a while he would take out the book again and write something. So this friend said, "Can I see your book?" He says, "No, I won't let you read this book." She says, "Why?" He says, "Because I write my sins in this. Whenever I sin, I write it down in this book so that it reminds me of my sin so that I can do istighfar." When this shaheed, when he was martyred, this friend gets hold of that book. He takes that book and opens it. And when he opens it, nothing was written in there. It was an empty book. So even when the thought came in his mind, he would threaten himself that, "Baba, if you are going to sin, I'm going to write this down. So leave aside the angels." But he had put it on himself. This is how careful they were of sins. And this is when you see the bravery on the battlefield. So your performance off the field will determine your performance on the battlefield. Past deeds have an effect on our performance on the battlefield. Conventional warfare, no army would tell you this. No non-Muslim army would tell you this. But when you look at the biography of Qasim Soleimani, for example, the way he would talk to his soldiers, have taqwa of Allah, and the rulings that have been given by Ayatollah Sistani, the morality, the ethics on the battlefield, their personal etiquette, their personal akhlaq was paramount when it came to performance on the battlefield. Then we come to the third group. The third group are the shuhada. Again, according to conventional warfare, secular warfare, when you lose soldiers, it's a loss. Especially what is happening in Israel just now. The IDF soldiers, every soldier, وَلَا يَتَمَنَّوْنَهُ أَبَدًا. Quran says, when you tell them that if you are the friends of Allah, ask for death. And they will never ask for death, Quran says. They don't like to die. And every death is a problem. On the other side, Quran says, verse number 169, same, Battle of Uhud. وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. So here, people think you are alive, and when you get martyred, you are dying. Allah says, no, when you get martyred, you are not dying. You are going to the true life, where you are going to be given the true rizq of Allah. When a soldier is told this, and he believes in it with certainty, he is not scared of death. In fact, he is willing to get martyred. They look forward to martyrdom. You look at the soldiers today, the Palestinians, they say, we are going to fight or we are going to get martyred. So the concept of martyrdom is a big plus point when it comes to the Muslims. And this is a victory on its own. And the fourth group, those who fought but did not attain martyrdom, they are the patient ones. So there came a time when there was some of them actually weeping, and we see this in the battle today also. Shaheed Qasim Soleimani himself, in his last meeting with his daughter, he says, I've been wanting martyrdom for the past 60 years or 50 years. From the time he joined the army, the Iran-Iraq war, he was craving for martyrdom. There's a difference between craving for martyrdom and suicide. It's not that you just go to the battlefield and you get killed. No. You have to be very, very careful not to lose your life. To protect your life is wajib. But martyrdom is a gift that is given to you by Allah. So he says there are only 13 who remained with the Prophet, 8 Ansar and 5 Muhajirin. But Quran tells them also, يَسْتَبْشِرُونَ بِنِعْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَضْلٍ وَأَنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُضِيعُ أَجْرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Yes, those people have attained martyrdom and they've gone ahead. And as they enter paradise, they are thinking about those people who are still alive and say, inshallah, they will also be successful. They rejoice. So the people who are alive, they rejoice in Allah's blessing and grace, and that Allah does not waste the reward of the faithful. But the bigger test was the battle of Hamra al-Asr. They were demoralized, the Muslims. So they went back to Medina and then they were told, regroup and go back. And this was very, very difficult for the Muslims. So the Quran says, الَّذِينَ اسْتَجَابُوا لِلَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا أَصَابَهُمُ الْقَرْحِ. So those who responded to the Prophet's call, those who responded to Allah and the Apostle, even after they had been wounded. So Noman Ali Khan explains this. He says there's jarh and there's qarh. Jarh is a superficial wound. Qarh is one that goes up to the bone, a very deep wound. So they were wounded, the wounds were deep, but the wounds of the soul were also very deep. They had lost loved ones, losing 70 shuhada on the Muslim side. And Medina was a very small community. 70 people whom they knew, they were deeply wounded. Yet they answered the call of the Prophet when they were called. الَّذِينَ أَحْسَنُوا مِنْهُمْ وَاتَّقُوا أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. For those of them who have been virtuous and God-weary, there shall be a great reward. Allah says we are going to reward them. Then الَّذِينَ قَالَ لَهُمُ النَّاسُ إِنَّ النَّاسَ قَدْ جَمَعُوا لَكُمْ. They were told that people have gathered to come and kill you. They have regrouped, the Quraysh have regrouped to come and kill you. فَخْشَوْهُمْ. Be wary of them, you should be scared of them. فَزَادَهُمْ إِيمَانًا وَقَالُوا حَسْبُنَا اللَّهُ وَنِعْمَ الْوَكِيلُ. This only increased their faith. It increased their faith, and they said, Allah is sufficient for us and He is an excellent trustee. This is a very interesting verse. Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. This is something that we recite in Surah Fajr. After the Fajr prayers, the dua that we have, Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. فَانْقَلَبُوا بِنِعْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَضْلٍ لَمْ يَمْسَسْهُمْ سُوءٌ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ. It's beautiful. And this is the verse that is there on every Palestinian's lip just now. When the Palestinians are interviewed, those who have lost loved ones, those who have been bombed, when they're interviewed in the hospital, this Hasbunallahu wa ni'mal wakil. Allah is enough, He's sufficient for us, and He's an excellent trustee. فَانْقَلَبُوا بِنِعْمَةٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَفَضْلٍ لَمْ يَمْسَسْهُمْ سُوءٌ وَاتَّبَعُوا رِضْوَانَ اللَّهِ وَاللَّهُ ذُو فَضْلٍ عَظِيمٍ. They pursued the pleasure of Allah, and Allah is a dispenser of great grace. So this is as far as the battle of Uhud is concerned. So now we have a template. Victory and loss is not only the armaments that we have and the number of soldiers that we have and the number of losses that we have and how much have we conquered. And it's not only sanctions when you try to subdue your enemy. Quran gives a whole new dimension. It talks about the heart. What is your preparation before the battle? If you have purified yourself, even before going to battle, you have already won. If you get martyred on the battlefield, you have won. If you obey the Prophet and the command of Allah, if you obey the command of Allah and the Holy Prophet, you have won. If you are steadfast on the battlefield without running away, you have won regardless of the result of the battle. This is a whole new dimension that Quran gives. So now that we have a template, let's try to apply it to what is happening in this battle just now. Tufan al-Quds, Again, we have four groups. We have the hypocrites, those who don't want to participate in the battle. It is lack of faith. Quran explains it. It's lack of faith. There's a problem in their earning. There's a problem in their earning, and that's why they don't want to participate. Hubbud dunya. They love this world. The luxuries that they have, they don't want to let go. Exactly the way Allah describes the hypocrites of the Battle of Uhud. And love of power. They don't want to let go of the power that they have. And that's why they are not jumping on the bandwagon in this war. So the biggest munafiqeen in this case are the Palestinian Authority, the PA. You leave aside all the nations who are sitting behind, but the Palestinian Authority, previously the PLO, today only it was there in the news, in the West Bank, they killed the top commander of was it Hamas or so? He was not killed by the Israelis, he was killed by the PA soldiers. So they're helping the Israelis to subdue the resistance in the West Bank. And they're being paid by the Israelis. So one of the things, when Netanyahu was told that now you're going to be taken to the ICC, so he tells the US government that you better stop this. You cannot have a warrant against me because you have been in a similar situation, in the same situation as I have been just now, as I am. And you had threatened that our soldiers, the American soldiers, are committing crimes in Iraq, in Somalia, but they're not going to face the ICC tribunal. So Netanyahu tells them that you have been in my position and you did not let ICC prosecute you, so you can't let them prosecute me. But very interesting, he says, if I am taken to the tribunal, ICC, if they give out a warrant, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut funding to the PA. West Palestinian Authority, I'm going to cut the funding. And it's just going to disintegrate. The Palestinian Authority is going to disintegrate because they're not getting funding from Israel. This is just yesterday or today in the news. And all the GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, they are focused on the 2030 vision. They don't want to participate. Hubbud dunya, Palestine is a burden for them. Bahrain, no better. UAE, same issue. So Quran has clearly described it is their faith, lack of faith, it is their source of earning, it is hubbud dunya, and there's power. They love power. There's a problem with them. Then you have those who ran away from the battlefield. I'm sure the people maybe in Gaza or West Bank who have fought before and have run away. But in this category, you can put the Egyptians. The Egyptians have fought a war with Israelis and they had won it to an extent. They created crisis because of which the British Prime Minister had to resign, the Suez Canal crisis. But then they withdrew and decided to normalize ties with Israel. So maybe they can be put into this category. But they've also jumped into the Munafiqeen bandwagon also. This is the government, not the people of Egypt. The political analysts keep on mentioning that there's a big difference with the people ruling the countries and the general population. Third group, of course, is the martyrs, the shuhada, the Palestinian shuhada. Our salam on them. How brave have they been, the women, the children, the people of Palestine. The soldiers, not only today, but for the past 75 years, they've stood firm, putting their lives on line. And now the Yemenis and the Hezbollah giving their youth for this cause. Yemen, Hezbollah, the Syrians, the Iranians, and only today it's there in the news, Al-Ashtar Brigades, named after Maliki Ashtar. This is a new group that has come up. Al-Ashtar Brigades from Bahrain. So it's not affiliated to the Bahraini government, but it's a group that has come up from Bahrain, and they have attacked an Israeli convoy, I think of trucks or something. So the axis of resistance now is spreading. And of course, the fourth group is the patient ones and the survivors. The ones who are surviving in Palestine. So there are two interviews that I want you to watch. You might have watched it already. Dr. Thayer Ahmed. Dr. Thayer Ahmed is a Palestinian American doctor who had gone to Gaza recently to serve, and he's just come back, and he was invited in the White House in one of the iftars during the holy month of Ramadan. He was invited to the White House. He went there, and he was the first one to speak to President Biden. And he talked about Gaza. He handed over a letter from an orphan in Gaza. He handed it to the president. He stood up and left in protest from the White House. So he's become famous, and he's giving out many interviews. And the way he talks about Palestinians, how they have changed his life, how they have embraced martyrdom, how punctual they are in their prayers. He says he had just reached the hospital, and within 5 minutes there was a martyr who was brought in. A 21-year-old was brought in, and on the floor, hospital floor, they were doing a CPR just to save him. And his family had come with him. His parents and his siblings had come with him. So while the doctors were giving a CPR, Dr. Thayer also came in there, just 5 minutes. He just kept his bag, and he came in his first case there. They tried, and of course, he got martyred. Now, breaking the news to the parents. So the doctor walks over to the parents, not Dr. Thayer, the other doctor. He goes to the father and tells him, "Your son has been martyred." So the father asks him, what were his last words? So the doctor says, you want to know his last words? His last words was, "La ilaha illallah, Muhammadur Rasulullah." So he says, "Really? Are you saying the truth?" He says, "Yes, this is what I heard from him." So he says, "Then you don't have a problem. We are happy that he got martyred on the right path." So people who have been martyred and people who have survived. He talks about the importance given to prayer, how hospitable they were. And iftar, they make sure that he was with them. And there's another doctor by the name of Dr. Haifa, an old lady. She's also a doctor. She was also in Palestine, in Gaza. And she says, "There's something in Gaza. I've left my heart in Gaza," she says. He says, when you're in Gaza, when you meet the children, you don't ask them whether you know the Quran or not. You ask them whether you're hafid the Quran or not. All of them have done hifz of the Holy Quran. So this is what you ask them. Are you hafid the Quran or not? They all know the Quran. But whether they have memorized the Quran or not is what you ask them. She says they were prepared for this. Spiritually, la yukallifullahu nafsan illa wasa'aha. They were prepared, and that's why Allah chose them for this imtihan. So these are the survivors of Palestine, the patient ones, the sabirun. So, what should be the conclusion here? This is the test of Palestinians. What is our test? There's a test awaiting us also. As we sit here, we are being tested as to how we are facing this crisis. What are we doing for these people of Palestine? So another verse number 140, which also describes the Battle of Uhud. He says, "Iyamsabskum qarhun faqad massal qawmu qarhum mithlu." If wounds afflict you, like wounds have already afflicted those people, then وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. And we make such vicissitudes rotate amongst mankind. So if it's happening to Palestinians today, it could happen to us. وَتِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. Why? وَلْيَعْلَمَ اللَّهُ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. So that Allah may ascertain those who have faith. If we say we have faith, we are going to be tested. تِلْكَ الْأَيَّامُ نُدَاوِلُهَا بَيْنَ النَّاسِ. It's happening to the Palestinians, it could happen to us. To ascertain whether our faith is strong enough, or وَيَتَّخِذَ مِنْكُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. In Zayat al-Waritha, we always say, فَيَا لَيْتَنِي كُنْتُ مَعَكُمْ فَنَفُوزَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. I wish we were with you. We ask for death. Allah says, you ask for it. If you want to be a shaheed, He's going to give you an opportunity. So it could happen to us. This is a test. Wallahu la yuhibbul zalimin. And Allah does not like the wrongdoers. So as they have been tested, and coincidentally, Dr. Haifa, this old lady who had gone to Gaza, she mentions this Quranic verse. She says when she talked to the Palestinians said, before October 7th, we had a relatively good life. And it has turned upside down. Dr. Thayer says, he sat with one of the Palestinians and he says, what is it that has changed in you? And Dr. Thayer says, this is what changed me also. This Palestinian said that before October 7th, I was complaining that we were getting electricity only for 12 hours a day. I couldn't go to restaurants to eat because the food was the same. I couldn't go to North Gaza. I could just move from north to south of Gaza. Now I can't. He says, I was complaining before October the 7th. So I was complaining about my food, I was complaining about electricity, I was complaining about movement. He says, here I am in South Gaza now with no electricity, no food, no water, and I can't even go out of here in fear of my life. He says the people of Gaza also keep on mentioning this verse, that there was a time we were in comfort and now we are in problems. This could happen to us also. This is our test. Are we prepared? These are not only 4 groups that have been mentioned for the people of Uhud. Where are we going to stand when this opportunity comes on us? And it is going to come. This is Allah's promise. We are going to be tested. But more importantly, when you talk of jihad, jihad is not only on the battlefield. Shaheed Ali Chitsazian, one of the shuhada of Iran, and this was quoted by Rahbar. He says, you will not be able to penetrate the barbed wire of the enemy until you have penetrated the barbed wire of your soul. You need to penetrate the barbed wire of your soul before you can penetrate the barbed wire of the enemy. Meaning that there is a smaller jihad which is on the battlefield, but there is a greater jihad within our nafs, the jihad within our souls. Our performance on the battlefield, on the lesser battle, will depend on our performance in the greater battle, with our souls, with our nafs. So all these points that I have mentioned, we can apply it to ourselves also. Not on the battlefield, but this battle of nafs that we have. How many times do we act like hypocrites in this battle? How many times do we run away from challenges like the people of Uhud? Yes, there are times when we sacrifice ourselves, become the martyrs, and there are times we go through difficulty and we stand. We've gone through a test and we're still standing. This is what should be crossing our mind when we read these verses of the Battle of Uhud. So these are the lessons. Inshallah, may Allah give us the tawfiq to read these verses, to understand the Battle of Uhud, to understand the causes, the results, as to why people behaved the way they did in the Battle of Uhud, apply it in our lives, inshallah improve our lives so that when the test comes, we may be successful, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.